Imagine being punished for a crime you didn't commit, cursed by the very goddess you swore to serve. Forget the snakes for a moment. This is the tragic reality behind the monster. This is the true story of Medusa. Imagine a world where the sky is not just air and clouds, but the home of capricious beings who watch your every move. We are in ancient Greece, a land of white marble, endless olive groves, and a sea so blue it seems to hide secrets beyond human understanding. In this setting, where myths come to life and the shadows of gods are cast upon the cities, our story begins. But this is not the tale of a hero in golden armor, nor the chronicle of a war won with swords. This is the story of a name that sends shivers down our spines today, but which began as a whisper of admiration. Medusa. In the markets of Athens, the squares of Corinth, and the farthest corners of the Peloponnese, people spoke of her. Though born of ancient sea gods, she was the only mortal among her sisters, a woman of flesh and blood in a world of immortals. They say that when she walked, even the wind seemed to calm so as not to ruffle her long hair, a silken cascade that shimmered under the Mediterranean sun. Her beauty was so pure, so absolute, that poets began to write verses comparing her to Aphrodite herself, and that, though no one knew it at the time, was her first mistake. For in a world ruled by the egos of immortals, to stand out too much is to beckon tragedy. Medusa grew up under the weight of those gazes. To many she was a blessing, to others an omen. Her eyes did not reflect malice, but a profound innocence, oblivious to the power games of Olympus. However, fate was already weaving its threads. While mortals sighed for her from above, the eyes of the gods began to fixate on her form. In the temples, priests whispered that such beauty could not be ignored forever. The air felt heavy, like the stillness that precedes a thunderstorm about to break the sky. She did not seek power, nor did she wish for her name to be remembered for millennia. She only sought a place where her beauty was not a currency or a provocation. But in the Greece of myths, fate is not chosen, it is endured. The whisper of destiny was no longer a distant echo. It had become a silent roar about to change her life and human history forever. Thus the legend is born, not with snakes and hatred, but with the vulnerability of a young woman who only wanted to be the master of her own existence in a world where gods played with the lives of mortals as if they were mere pieces on a marble board. It was not a common beauty, it was one that caused pain. In the stone streets of ancient Greece, the name of Medusa became a sort of prayer and, at the same time, a silent sin. Imagine walking through the agora and feeling how conversations stop, how merchants forget their coins, and how soldiers lower their spears just to watch her pass. It wasn't vanity that moved Medusa. It was a natural grace, almost tragic, that enveloped her like an aura of white light. Her hair, before becoming the nightmare we all know, was her most sacred feature, a mane so long and lustrous it seemed woven from the threads of the deepest midnight. But beauty, in a world of envious mortals and jealous gods, is never a free gift. It is a target. The admiration she inspired began to transform into something darker, obsession. Men did not see her as a woman, but as a trophy that nature had stolen from Olympus. In the taverns, travelers swore her eyes held the color of the sea before a storm, and in the palaces, nobles began to openly compare her to the goddesses. She is more beautiful than Athena herself, some whispered, emboldened by wine. And those words, heavy with a dangerous hubris, flew on the wind to the ears of those who never forgive a slight. Medusa felt that weight. She felt the gazes of women turn sharp as daggers, charged with an envy that corroded the air. She felt the desire of men become a physical presence, a shadow that followed her wherever she went. She could no longer walk alone without feeling like prey in an open field. Her loveliness, which should have been her greatest pride, became her prison. She began to understand that being the fairest of them all was not a privilege, but a sentence of isolation. She did not want to be an icon or a muse, and much less a rival to the divinities who ruled from the clouds. Inside her, a desperate longing for invisibility grew. a craving for a sanctuary where her face would not be the center of every storm. While the world shouted her name and poets competed to describe her grace, Medusa searched for an exit, a place where the lust of men and the fury of goddesses could not reach her. But fate, ever ironic, was guiding her precisely toward the place where her beauty would cease to be a whisper and become the scream of an eternal tragedy. Envy had already taken root, and the danger lay not in her heart, but in the eyes of those who could not stop looking at her. Seeking a refuge where her beauty would cease to be a provocation and become an act of devotion, Medusa made the decision that would change her fate forever. She would dedicate her life to divine service. She crossed the threshold of the imposing Hekatompedon, the heart of stone and marble in Athens, to prostrate herself at the feet of the goddess of wisdom, just war, and craftsmanship. She sought neither power nor influence, nor the luxuries offered by the nobles in the outside world. Medusa sought silence. She wanted the sacred walls of the temple to be her shield, and the priestess's veil to hide her face from the hungry gazes that pursued her through the streets. As she swore her vows of eternal chastity before the colossal gold and ivory statue of Athena, she believed, for the first time in her young life, that she was finally free. Life in the temple was a choreography of shadows and torchlight. Medusa dedicated herself with fierce discipline to her tasks, cleaning the marble altars, tending the sacred fire that must never die, and chanting hymns that echoed through the high vaults of the sanctuary. Beneath her white robe, her body no longer belonged to the desires of men, but to the will of the goddess. The temple air, heavy with incense and myrrh, seemed to purify her every thought. However, her presence did not go unnoticed. Despite the walls, despite the oaths, and despite the sanctity of the place, the rumor of her beauty did not fade. It transformed into a forbidden legend. The most beautiful priestess in all of Greece hides behind the columns of Athena, they whispered in the ports and markets. This fame was a slow-acting poison. Medusa walked the side aisles of the temple, believing the goddess's protection was an unbreakable contract. She was unaware that, for the immortals, humans are often pieces on a chessboard or, worse, mere ornaments in their own glory. She served with humility, not knowing that her devotion was placing her at the center of a storm no mortal could withstand. The temple, which she saw as her ultimate fortress, was in reality a glass cage. While she prayed for peace in the depths of the sea and the heights of Olympus, the eyes of the gods began to focus on that exact point on the map. The most sacred place in the city was about to become the stage for a profanation that not even the laws of the gods could stop. And Medusa, in her innocent faith, continued to light the lamps that would guide her own predator to her. The fate of mortals is often decided in a moment of divine distraction, but Medusa's was sealed with a gaze charged with an ancient and ravenous ambition. While she carried out her sacred duties in the twilight of the temple, she was unaware that marble walls were no match for the eyes of a god. Poseidon, the lord of earthquakes and abyssal depths, the god whose temperament is as unstable and violent as the ocean he rules, saw her. It was not a chance encounter. It was a silent hunt from the other side of the spiritual veil. Poseidon was not looking for a devotee, nor was he interested in the purity that Medusa tried to protect so zealously under her priestess's mantle. To the god of the sea, she was not a human being with a soul and dreams, but a jewel that the earth was hiding from him, a challenge to his absolute dominion over all that is beautiful and wild. Imagine Poseidon's presence, a force of nature smelling of brine, storm, and shipwreck. His eyes, deep and dark like marine trenches, fixed upon Medusa's figure as she lit the sanctuary lamps. In that moment, the peace she had so painstakingly built in Athena's temple began to crack. The air grew heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on her arms stand up. The sound of the sea, once a distant lullaby on the Athenian coast, began to thunder in her ears as if the waves were crashing against the very columns of the Hekatompedon. Poseidon did not see sanctity in her. He saw a conquest. For a god accustomed to currents bending to his will and the most colossal beasts of the abyss obeying him, the implicit refusal in Medusa's vows was an insult that could only be resolved through possession. Poseidon's gaze was a decree of war against Medusa's tranquility. She felt that pressure, that damp cold seeping through the cracks of her refuge. It did not matter how much she prayed to Athena or how tightly she clung to her vows of chastity. A divine predator had marked her trail. The god of the sea, moved by a desire that blended aesthetic admiration with primitive cruelty, decided that what belonged to the temple must belong to him. Tragedy was no longer a distant possibility, but a rising tide threatening to flood the city's most sacred site. Medusa, in her small and insignificant humanity, had no way of knowing that simply being seen by a god was the beginning of a shipwreck from which no one would emerge unscathed. The waters of fate were churning, and the storm was about to break the silence of the marble. The air inside the Hekatompedon suddenly grew dense, charged with a metallic scent of brine and an electric storm that did not belong to the calm of the Athenian night. Medusa, standing alone among the shadows cast by the immense marble columns, felt the cold of the ocean seeping through the cracks of the sacred floor. The silence of the temple, which for months had been her only solace, transformed into a terrifying void. There was no prior warning, only the manifestation of a divine will that knows no limits and respects no mortal laws. Poseidon, the Earthshaker, did not enter the sanctuary as a suppliant, but as an absolute conqueror. His presence filled the space, a force of nature whose shadow made the stone walls seem as fragile as glass. Medusa recoiled, her heart hammering against her chest, her trembling hands searching desperately for Athena's altar. In her innocent faith, she hoped the sacred marble would act as a shield, that the goddess of just war would descend with her spear to defend the purity of her home. But the temple remained in a deathly silence, a vacuum echoing with the indifference of immortals toward human suffering. Poseidon did not see in Medusa a priestess dedicated to service. He saw prey trapped in a golden cage. Ignoring the most ancient laws of hospitality and sanctity, the god of the sea claimed by force what did not belong to him. It was an act of blind violence that profaned not only a woman's body, but the very essence of the sacred. Imagine the heartbreaking contrast: the white marble stained by the shadow of a dark god, and the stifled cries of one who believed she was under the highest protection in the world. In her desperation, Medusa fixed her gaze upon the gold and ivory statue of Athena, pleading for justice. However, the divine effigy remained motionless, its blind eyes watching the tragedy without blinking. When the god finally withdrew, leaving behind a trail of salt and disaster, Medusa lay broken on the cold floor. The refuge she had chosen to escape the desire of men had been violated by an immortal, proving that, for the inhabitants of Olympus, mortals are but disposable pieces in their power games. The betrayal was complete, and the silence that returned to the Hekatompedon was no longer that of peace, but of a crime that would change the fate of humanity forever. The silence that followed Poseidon's departure was more terrifying than the storm itself. Medusa, broken upon the cold marble of the Hekatompedon, waited for a hand to lift her up, a sign of comfort, or a divine voice to punish her defiler. However, on Olympus, justice is not measured by the scales of truth, but by those of pride. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategic war, did not descend to comfort her betrayed priestess. She descended to reclaim her wounded honor. To the goddess, Medusa's body was not that of a victim in need of justice, but the site of an unforgivable stain upon her own house. In the cruel logic of the immortals, the fault was not the sea god's violent act, but the impurity that now dwelt within the temple. Athena's fury did not dare touch her uncle Poseidon, but it fell with its full weight upon the young mortal who had no voice to defend herself. The transformation was an agony that disintegrated Medusa's humanity in a matter of seconds. Imagine the young woman's body writhing under a curse that devoured her skin, turning it cold, rough, and covered in scales that shimmered with a sickly, greenish hue. But the greatest horror sprouted from her head. That black silken hair, once the subject of envy and poems, began to stir with a life of its own, malicious and wild. Each strand of hair turned into a hissing serpent, creatures of venom and fangs that replaced beauty with dread. The sound of hissing filled the sacred precinct, drowning out the screams of a woman watching her reflection turn into a nightmare. Her eyes, which once reflected a deep innocence, became two stone orbs charged with a final and absolute curse. Anyone who dared to look at her, anyone who sought a trace of the girl she once was, would be turned to stone in an instant of eternal terror. Athena did not just strip away her human form. She took away her right to be seen and loved. She condemned her to the deepest solitude, turning her greatest attribute into her most lethal weapon. If they so desired to gaze upon you, the goddess's sentence seemed to dictate, now no one shall do so, and live to tell the tale. Medusa tried to cover her face, but the touch of the snakes against her hands made her recoil in a spasm of horror. There was no trial, there was no compassion. In a divine blink, the victim was labeled a monster by the very deity to whom she had surrendered her life and faith. The unjust punishment was sealed with the seal of Olympus, and Medusa, the young woman who only sought refuge from the world's gaze, was cast out into a darkness from which she would never return, carrying a guilt that was never hers. The transformation did not end with physical pain. The torment of consciousness was only beginning. Cast out from the city that once admired her, Medusa found herself turned into an aberration that nature itself seemed to reject. As she walked, the soft brush of her feet on the grass was replaced by the constant hissing of the serpents that now crowned her head. An orchestra of venom that never fell silent, not even in her dreams. Every time she tried to seek her reflection in the crystal-clear water of a stream, what she saw was not the young priestess with sad eyes, but a nightmare creature with scales shimmering under the moon, and a gaze that promised absolute emptiness. The world that once desired her now fled from her with instinctive dread. Medusa was no longer a woman. She was a walking legend of terror, a living reminder of the cruelty of the gods. The first encounter with another living being sealed her definitive condemnation. Imagine a lost traveler, or perhaps a curious soul seeking to prove if the rumors were true, coming face to face with her in the twilight. Medusa, in a surge of humanity, wanted to cry out for help, to scream that she was still herself, that she meant no harm. But as she looked up and locked eyes with the stranger, time stopped with a sharp snap. In a second, the warmth of life was sucked from the man's body. His skin turned gray and cold, and his features were frozen forever in a mask of absolute horror. Medusa did not just carry death in her hair. Her own gaze had become a prison of stone. Upon seeing the lifeless statue before her, she understood the magnitude of her curse. She was condemned to kill that which she craved most: human contact. That was the true birth of the monster. It was not born of malice, but of desperation and imposed isolation. The guilt, which did not belong to her, began to crystallize within her as hard as the marble of her victims. The world's hatred started to seep into her spirit, and Medusa accepted the role the gods had assigned her. If the universe saw her as a demon, she would stop fighting that shadow. She retreated to the depths of caverns, where the sunlight could not remind her of what she had lost, surrounding herself with a silence broken only by the slithering movement of her crown of vipers. The young woman who sought protection in a temple was now the most feared creature in creation, a victim transformed into an executioner by the injustice of an Olympus that preferred to create monsters rather than admit its own sins. Banished from the domains of men and the sight of gods, Medusa sought refuge at the edges of the known world, where sunlight seems to hesitate before touching the earth. She settled in a forgotten region, an island of shadows and perpetual mist, where time stood still alongside her hope. Imagine a landscape of absolute silence, interrupted only by the constant hissing of the serpents crowning her head and the echo of her own footsteps on the stone floor. This was not a home. It was a mausoleum. The young woman once admired by thousands in the squares of Athens now inhabited a nightmare lair, surrounded by the gray figures of those who, moved by curiosity or ambition, tried to find her. Each statue in her stone garden was a testament to a tragic encounter, Men frozen in gestures of terror, warriors with drawn swords that never struck, and travelers who only sought a way back home. Medusa's loneliness was not a simple physical isolation. It was a sensory and emotional prison. She could touch nothing without feeling the coldness of death, nor look at anything living without extinguishing it in a blink. In the twilight of her exile, memories of her life as a priestess began to blur, replaced by the weight of an existence that nature itself seemed to reject. The serpents of her hair became her only companions, creatures whispering secrets of venom and hatred into her ear, feeding a bitterness that grew with every century of solitude. The injustice of her punishment transformed into an armor of ice around her heart. Medusa stopped weeping for the woman she once was, and began to accept the identity of the monster the gods had designed for her. In her exile, she was the queen of a kingdom of statues, a sovereign of nothingness who knew only the company of shadows. Sometimes, in the depths of night, she would approach the seashore, listening to the roar of the waves that reminded her of Poseidon, the architect of her misfortune. She hated the sound, yet she could not pull away from it, as if a part of her being remained chained to the moment of profanation in the temple. Exile had turned her into a figure of legend, a warning parents told their children so they would not defy the immortals. But for Medusa, the myth held no glory. It only tasted of the metallic tang of abandonment and the fixed stare of those who could no longer see her. She was trapped in an eternal cycle of waiting, lingering for the moment when the world would decide her existence was too dangerous to be allowed, while she slowly became just another part of the landscape of stone and desolation that surrounded her. While Medusa sank into the silence of her exile, her end was being forged in the world of men under the mask of glory. It was not a savior who appeared, but an executioner, Perseus. The young warrior did not come of his own volition, but was sent by a king who desired his death. Yet he carried the favor of the gods who years ago had sealed Medusa's fate. To the world, Perseus was the brave hero who would rid the earth of a monster. To Medusa, he was just another tool of divine cruelty. Imagine the hunter approaching the lair of shadows, equipped not with his own courage, but with the gifts of Olympus, the winged sandals of Hermes, the helm of invisibility from Hades, and, cruelest of all, the polished shield of Athena. The very gods who had betrayed and transformed her were now arming the hand that would take her life. Perseus did not enter the cave with a direct gaze, for even the hero feared the power that injustice had bestowed upon Medusa. He moved like a shadow among the stone statues, those men who were once flesh and blood and who now served as silent warnings in the garden of despair. Medusa felt his presence. The hissing of her serpents grew frantic, a chorus of warnings vibrating in the damp air. She did not see a warrior seeking justice. She saw an invader coming to snatch away the only thing she had left, her solitary existence. The hunt was a game of reflections and deceit. Perseus did not look into her eyes. He used the gleam of Athena's shield to see her without being turned to stone, turning Medusa's own reflection into her death sentence. The hunter did not see the woman weeping in the dark, nor the priestess who once sought refuge in a temple. To him, she was merely a trophy, a head to be severed to fulfill a mission and earn a name in the songs of poets. The hero's lack of empathy was a reflection of Olympus's indifference. While Medusa prepared to defend her corner of shadows, Perseus lurked from invisibility, a cowardly advantage granted by the very beings who condemned her. The air in the cave grew heavy. The metal of the shield shone with a cold light, and fate, which had been playing with Medusa since the day of her birth, prepared for the final blow. The hunter was ready, and the victim, weary from centuries of solitude and scales, perhaps, deep down only hoped that the edge of the sword would be the end of her long and unjust torment. The steel blessed by the gods sliced through the air with surgical coldness. In one swift motion, guided by the reflection in Athena's shield, Perseus brought his sword down upon Medusa's neck. There was no epic battle lasting hours, nor an exchange of words. Only the dry sound of metal finding its mark and the sudden silence of the serpents that, for the first time in centuries, ceased their hissing. The Gorgon's head fell to the cave floor, but what gushed from her wound was not merely darkness. Legend says that from her blood, Chrysaor and the winged horse Pegasus were born, beings of light and strength emerging from the body of one whom the world only called a monster. Even in her final breath, Medusa gave life to beauty, a final irony that the gods could not snatch away. Perseus, without looking at the face he had just severed, wrapped the trophy in a sack, eager to claim the glory the poets had promised him. But death did not erase her power. It only transformed it into a tool of war. Medusa's head, her eyes still heavy with that petrifying gaze, was delivered to Athena, who placed it at the center of her shield, the Aegis. The very goddess who cursed her for being a victim of rape in her temple now used her face to terrify her own enemies. Medusa, who in life sought only refuge and peace, was condemned in death to be an eternal weapon in the service of the divinity that betrayed her. Her story was written by the victors, by those who needed a monster to justify the existence of their heroes. For millennia, her name was synonymous with horror, ugliness, and sin, hiding beneath layers of myth, the truth of a woman punished for the simple act of existing in a world ruled by the whims of immortals. Today, looking at the statues and paintings portraying her end, one must ask the question the myth always tried to silence. Was Medusa the monster who deserved to die? Or was she the mirror reflecting the true ugliness of the gods? Her tragedy did not end with Perseus's sword. It ended when the world chose to forget her humanity. In the end, Medusa's story is not the chronicle of a vanquished beast, but the lament of a profaned innocence and the echo of an injustice that still resonates in the cold marble of history. She never chose the snakes, nor the stone gaze, nor the exile in the shadows. She was created by envy, molded by violence, and destroyed by hypocrisy. Perhaps the ultimate truth is that the only monster in this story was the one who, having the power to protect her, chose instead to turn her pain into a legend of eternal terror. Medusa's tragedy reminds us that history is often written by those who hold the sword. If her story moved you, please leave a like to support the channel. Now I want to hear from you. Was she a monster or a victim? And what other myth should we uncover next? Tell us in the comments. Thanks for watching. Thanks